The next day, my dad shows up in his truck bed full of presents that he bought for this vet's family, for his kids, so that they didn't have to go through Christmas not receiving presents.
Ah, recognition. We all like to be recognized, including myself. I mean, it starts so young, sports, you get medals, you got trophies, academic, you got Dean's List, you got honor roll, you got excellent student awards, scouts, you've got merit badges, you have ranks. Military has all of its ranks. It has different awards for feats and acts of valor. Different governments have it. We have the Nobel Peace Prize. Our state has the Order of the Palmetto. We even have tombstones to recognize our lives. Maybe that's why the tomb of the unknown soldier is such a sacred place, because it represents an untold number of people who gave their ultimate sacrifice to their country anonymously. But what about the person who helps another anonymously without any expectation of recognition? To me, this, interestingly, is one reason why the Medal of Honor award is so intriguing, because talking to the recipients, they are so humble. If you call them a winner, they're probably going to smack you across the cheek. Kidding, but they don't like being called the winners. They are recipients. They were passively received it. They didn't do that to get a reward for their action. And not only that, they believe, rightfully so, that there were hundreds, if not other thousands of soldiers who would have done the same thing in their shoes, who also would have met their moment. Now, you and I are not likely to carry a wounded soldier across a battlefield under heavy enemy fire, but we have an opportunity to meet our own moment in our own way by helping another. This episode is dedicated to the anonymous giver, the anonymous givers who are all around us. So welcome, Jane Doe, to Beauty versus the Beast, where we highlight the beauty of humanity, individual actions versus all that is beastie in today's society. Years ago, you submitted a nomination of your father to the Civilian Medal of Honor Awards, and I just happened to be one of the screeners. And your story touched me, so I thought I'd reach out. Of course, Jane is anonymous. She did not want to reveal her identity, and I very much welcome you to the podcast and appreciate you sharing your and your father's story.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for reading and valuing my father's story. I'm always happy to talk about the impact that he had on me and on the lives that he was able to reach. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jane. First, I know this was a few years ago, but again, I'd like to express my condolences
Thank you.
about your father. So, getting started, tell me about your family.
Oh, well, so we were a little chaotic growing up. So I had two brothers and one sister. And so it was a house of intermittent chaos. And my dad, he was the calm within the storm. He was the anchor in our family. So growing up, we really relied on him to bring the peace and stability into the house. And I think that was partially because he grew up with five brothers.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he grew up in chaos and was able to develop and maintain his steady demeanor. And so we all try to model ourselves off of that.
So he was calm in the face of chaos. That had to have been really reassuring growing up.
It was extremely reassuring, and also why he was such a good addition to the US Army. I mean, you want the people defending our country to be calm in the face of danger and chaos, and he really embodied that not only in his work but at home too. So we were safe when he was around.
Wow. So tell me about his service.
So he was a sergeant in the US Army. He really didn't talk much about what he was doing. I mean, we knew that he received two Purple Hearts for
Wow.
military merit and wounds in action. And so we knew that he was doing amazing things at the time he served. But to us, when he spoke, he didn't focus on the challenges he faced or the violence he saw, but instead on the bonds forged through it, the camaraderie. I mean, he was focused on the positive of the things he gained through his service, the bonds that he took away from it. Loyalty was so important to him. And he instilled that in us when he talked about his time.
Wow. Wow. So I know your father passed a few years ago, and the reason you submitted to the society and the award was for things that you found out after your father passed from people you met. Please share some of those stories when, if you don't mind going back to your father's funeral.
Of course. So, what's actually crazy about all of this is that my siblings and I, we always knew that he was a great father to us. What was surprising was at his funeral, how many people just approached us with touching stories about acts that my father performed that we just we had no idea about. A couple of stories. Well, one family came up to us, and so we did know that occasionally my father would drive other veterans to the VA hospital to just if they couldn't drive themselves or if they had no way to get there. So we knew that he occasionally did that to help fellow veterans out. What we didn't know is one man came up to us and told us about a time that father drove him sometimes and he was in need of an operation, and my father knew that he was struggling financially. And so behind the scenes, totally unknown to the fellow, he went and he paid his medical bill. And
Wow.
he, the guys he paid for, he didn't know about it until later on. My dad didn't tell him either. It was just I had no idea. We had no idea.
You
Is
met this
that
gentleman at the funeral? He came up to you?
yeah, they came up to us just to say thank you, to share the kind of guy that my dad was. And
Wow.
so, above and beyond just providing a ride, I mean, it was just such a great thing to hear. Actually, my favorite story that I heard was that around Christmas time, my dad was talking to another veteran and he was talking about how he was struggling financially and that he didn't know if and how he was gonna buy, Christmas gifts for his kids and just didn't want them to be disappointed, but it wasn't in the budget. And so the next day, my dad shows up in his truck bed full of presents that he bought for this vet's family, for his kids, so that they didn't have to go through Christmas not receiving presents.
Wow.
I know. I know. I feel like most people, hearing that story would feel bad for that person's family and really wish that they had more, send them good wishes, but that's all they would do. But my dad, he didn't do that. He went out, bought presents, and brought them to them the next day without request, without wanting anything in return. That was that was the kind of guy he was. And again, we didn't know about it.
Yeah. Wow. So it had to have been, in spite of the grief, heartwarming as you hear these stories that you hadn't heard of before at your dad's funeral. How did the family take all this?
It was heavy and sad, as you said,
Yeah.
to hear these things and, realize that there was a whole other side to my dad that we knew he was a great person, a generous person, but we didn't know the extent of how many lives he touched, how far he would go for others.
Hmm.
We knew that he'd do that for us, for his immediate family, but for people he didn't know personally, it didn't matter. It was just doing what was right to him is what he did.
Wow.
So he performed many of the services for different veterans. And one family came up, and it was the wife of a veteran who had already passed. And she talked about how my dad performed a service for them. And every step of the way was completely focused on the family, on his past veteran's wife and children, making sure the service was what they wanted and intended. So checked in with them every step of the way to make sure that they were happy with how things were going. Checked in with them after the service to make sure that everything went the way they wanted to, and kept in touch after that. So again, we knew, our family knew that he performed services occasionally, but we didn't know that he touched others like that, and
Mm,
how he focused on the family specifically, making it personal for them. So it was great to hear these things about my dad. It was definitely a surprise in the moment how much we didn't know. But now being able to learn these things about him and potentially still learn new things about him it makes me feel closer to my dad after he's
mm,
gone. My siblings and I all appreciate that.
mm. Bet so. Did it change your opinion of your dad at all afterwards? How did y'all view him after the service, after hearing all this?
And yes and no to changing my opinion of him. He was an amazing father, and
Mm,
I knew how far he would go for us.
hmm
So that if I had heard these stories being described about him doing this for my siblings and I wouldn't have been as surprised to hear that he was just doing it for all the people around him.
mm,
That was where the surprise lay. I knew he was generous. I didn't know he was this generous.
mm,
I didn't know that his humility went to this. I mean, he didn't mention this stuff. He was so humble. So it amplified his good traits to us, I think, to realize how important it was to carry these values and share them with everyone that he met.
mm. Why do you think he didn't tell you about these things before?
I just think to him, it was just always the right thing to do.
Huh.
It didn't occur to him to seek out compliments or appreciation from others. He was just doing what felt right to him, and that's that. There we
Hmm.
go. Task accomplished.
Calming the storm.
Calm the storms. He was a simple guy, simple pleasures. He was happiest spending time with family, just
Yeah.
riding his bike, looking at a nice painting. I mean, he was great. He was an anchor. He was
Hmm.
our anchor. Just
Have you kept in touch with any of these new people that you met?
so actually, the family that we learned about that he bought the Christmas presents before,
Yeah.
we didn't realize that since he did that for them, they usually sent him a small gift each Christmas in thanks for what he did. And
Really?
so for the yes, and so for the past two Christmases, they have sent us Christmas cards with a picture of the whole family together, and always just a nice personalized note saying they remember what my father did for them.
Hmm.
And so we now exchange Christmas cards with them as well. And it's always great to get that reminder each year of the lasting impact that my dad had not only on us, but on others.
Wow. Your dad sounds like an amazing human being. We're all
He
lucky.
was.
Wish I would have known him. Well, thank you, Jane, so much for sharing your dad's story and your family's story. And I wish you all the best.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me and helping me to honor him.
According to Giving USA, there was over $550 billion in charitable giving made in 2023 last year. That's the highest amount of raw dollars in the world by far. I think the rest of the world combined doesn't quite make up what Americans give on an annual basis. Those dollars also come 70% from individuals. That's $1,500 per person in the United States. And even if you think about that skeptically, that some of this is politically driven, that some of these charities have some political undercurrent, I did a deep dive with GPT to look at those numbers. And it estimated that only 10% of those charitable dollars are politically motivated. So that's still over $500 billion in charitable giving. Then you look according to AmeriCorps, approximately 25% of Americans volunteer their time to a cause. That's over 4 billion hours of work, or another cool $125 billion in value. And over half Americans have informally helped their neighbors in some way. Even more fun, the older people are, the higher these numbers are. Young people are working, they're spending their time trying to make ends meet. But the older people, once they've made ends meet, they're the ones that are helping. So when the news tell you everything is bad that happened that day, that week, how things are hopeless and we're becoming more polarized, I would say maybe in political circles that's true, but look around at your neighbors. They'd probably help you. Maybe they already have. They probably gave to a charity. They probably volunteered somewhere. And you know what? They didn't tell you about it. There are good John and Jane Does everywhere.